It was January 6th, 2021, a cold, grey winter morning in Washington, D.C. Thousands of people had gathered, waving flags and banners, fueled by the belief the election had been stolen. The atmosphere was tense but buzzing with energy. At the Save America rally, Donald Trump had just spoken, telling the crowd they'd need to fight, or risk losing their country forever. You could feel the crackling intensity in the air.
Yes, and it wasn't just rhetoric. This speech was the final fuse. By around noon, the crowd had begun moving toward the Capitol. Initially, it seemed like a large protest, but by early afternoon, this began to spiral rapidly out of control. Just imagine, barricades were being shoved aside, and groups of rioters began clashing with the Capitol Police. By 1:50 p.m, law enforcement had declared an official riot.
Right, and not just any riot. This was historic. The US Capitol, a symbol of American democracy, was suddenly under siege. By 2:11 p.m, rioters breached the building. It all happened so quickly.
Indeed. One of the first breaches happened when Dominic Petzola, a member of the Proud Boys, used a stolen police riot shield to smash through a window. This allowed others to pour inside. From there, it was chaos. Protesters roamed through hallways, waving flags and vandalising offices.
They even looted Speaker Pelosi's office, didn't they?
Yes, they did. And beyond theft and vandalism, the damage extended to the building itself. Doors broken, windows shattered, and walls defaced. It's shocking to think this wasn't just a protest gone wrong. There were individuals who came prepared, dressed in tactical gear, with plans to disrupt the certification of the Electoral College results.
And things got even more terrifying for Congress members. They were evacuated in the middle of this chaos. Imagine the fear as rioters were just feet away from entering chambers.
Yes, it was dire. Capitol Police Officer Eugene Goodman, for example, heroically led rioters away from the Senate chambers, buying lawmakers enough time to escape. And all this was happening while law enforcement and security were overwhelmed, under-equipped to handle the situation.
And the aftermath was staggering. Over $30 million in damage. Just staggering, isn't it?
Absolutely. The sheer cost of repairs, combined with the emotional toll, was immeasurable. But even in the immediate chaos, there was this undeniable realization. The Capitol assault was unlike anything we'd seen in modern US history.
And that's the thing. January 6th wasn't just an attack on a building. It was an attack on democracy itself.
And that leads us to why these individuals mobilised in the first place. It wasn't just aimless chaos. It was deeply tied to unwavering loyalty to Donald Trump and the pervasive belief in a stolen election. The rally cry was, "Stop the steal," and it clearly resonated with many there that day.
Exactly. The "Stop the Steal" narrative. It wasn't just a slogan. It was like a rallying cry that spread across social media and far-right circles. And to be clear, there was absolutely no evidence of widespread voter fraud. Courts, officials, everyone rejected those claims. But Trump's insistence carried weight. He was the catalyst for their belief.
Right. And what stood out to me was how it pulled in these organised extremist groups like the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers. They weren't just showing up, they were planning.
Oh, definitely. These groups had a very specific playbook. For example, the Proud Boys. They'd coordinated tactical movements, had people in communication using encrypted channels. Some of them came wearing combat-like gear ready for violence. Then, the Oath Keepers, well, they went even further. They actually set up weapon stockpiles outside DC, ready to escalate if necessary. It was, frankly, terrifying how deliberate it all was.
Wait, they stockpiled weapons?
They did. Thankfully, those weapons weren't brought into the city that day. But the fact that they were even in play tells you about their mindset. This wasn't spontaneous.
No, it wasn't. And then you've got Trump on the morning of January 6th standing at that rally. His speech was just, how do I put this, loaded with fiery rhetoric. He told them to fight like hell, to march to the Capitol.
Yes, and it's crucial to understand the power of those words in that moment. Many in that crowd truly believed they were acting on direct instructions. Trump had spent weeks challenging the legitimacy of the election, and now here he was, essentially urging them to take matters into their own hands. It's not difficult to see how his words pushed them over the edge.
And that's where it gets really dangerous, right? You take these already motivated groups, mix in Trump's speech, and suddenly you've got people charging barricades and breaking into the Capitol.
Absolutely. And the pace at which everything escalated, I keep coming back to the deliberate nature of it all. This wasn't just a protest. It was an insurgent attack designed to disrupt the certification of election results, to undermine democracy.
It's chilling. When you connect all these dots, the loyalty to a baseless narrative, the organised extremists and the president's words, it paints quite a stark picture of why January 6th spiralled the way it did.
When you lay it all out like that, it's almost overwhelming to comprehend how everything came together on January 6th. But just as striking as the events themselves is what followed, because the aftermath has been, in many ways, just as monumental.
Absolutely. The immediate reaction was swift. Just 1 week after the attack, on January 13th, 2021, Donald Trump was impeached for the second time in his presidency. The charge? Incitement of insurrection. It was historic. Never before in US history had a president been impeached twice.
And even though he wasn't convicted by the Senate, the political divide it caused was seismic.
Right. It deepened the already intense polarization. What we saw was not just a split between Democrats and Republicans, but even within the Republican Party itself. Some, like Liz Cheney, spoke out against Trump, while others doubled down, aligning more closely with him. It's fair to say January 6th became a litmus test for political loyalty in the years to follow.
And then came the investigations. The FBI launched one of the largest criminal probes in US history. More than 1,400 people were charged, and the evidence they uncovered was staggering.
Yes, it was. Many of those arrested were linked to extremist groups like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, and some of their leaders, like Enrique Tarrio and Stuart Rhodes, were convicted of seditious conspiracy. That charge isn't just serious, it's practically unheard of in modern times.
Wait, seditious conspiracy? Explain that.
It's essentially plotting to overthrow, put down, or destroy the government by force. It's a charge we haven't seen applied this widely since maybe the Civil War era. And these leaders weren't just bystanders, they actively organised and incited violence, using tactics you'd expect in a military operation.
It's chilling. And it brings me to this evolving narrative. I mean, even now, some politicians are trying to downplay what happened, calling it just a protest that got out of hand. How do you even begin to reconcile that with the facts?
It's deeply troubling. There's been this push, especially in far-right circles, to rewrite the history of January 6th, portraying the rioters as patriots or even victims. But when you look at the legal convictions, the damage, the injuries, it's impossible to ignore the severity of what happened. It wasn't just a protest, it was an attack on democracy itself.
And speaking of democracy, I think this is where January 6th leaves its biggest scar, doesn't it? The very foundation of the US, the peaceful transfer of power, was shaken to its core that day.
It was, and it's not just about the events of that single day. It's about what they represent, the erosion of trust, the weaponization of misinformation, and the fragility of democratic norms. The question now is, how does a society heal and prevent something like this from ever happening again?
Right. And as we think about all of this, the attack, the legal battles, the reshaping of political narratives, it's clear this isn't just a story about January 6th. It's about where democracy goes from here. And that's something we'll all need to grapple with in the years to come.
On that note, I think we'll leave it there. Thanks for listening, everyone. And as always, take care and stay informed.